to the provisions of Chapter 231 of the laws of 1976, the Open Public Meetings Act, Mr. Campbell notified the public that the notice of the date, time, location, and the agenda of this meeting, to the extent known, was provided at least 48 hours prior to the commencement of this meeting in the following manner. Number one, by posting such notice on the public announcement board of the Lakewood Board of Education offices in the Lakewood Township Municipal Building. Number two, by emailing such notice to the office of the Asbury Park Press. Number three, by filing such notice with the board secretary. And four, by mailing such notice to all individuals who requested and paid for the copy of same. We do a roll call. Mr. Zlakin? Here. Ms. Gonzalez? Mr. Nakdeman? Here. Mr. Newhouse? Here. Ms. Rodriguez? Here. Mr. Tendler? Here. Mr. Tricer? Here. Ms. Jackson Byers? Mr. Bender?
So you may be wondering what's going on in the act of the Robert's Rules of Order, Parliamentary Procedure. The President, the Vice President are not at the meeting at the appointed time of start. The Board Secretary can act in their absence until they get here.
Thank you, Mr. Springer. Right now, I'd like to read the...
Is there a presentation or we're going into closed session?
We're going into executive session. I need to read the resolution. Whereas the Public Law 1975, Chapter 231, known as the Open Public Meetings Act, provides that a public body may not exclude from the public any meetings to discuss any matter described herein until the public body has first adopted a resolution. And whereas the Board of Education of the Township of Lakewood has determined that the following items must be discussed in closed session and the public must be excluded from said deliberations. And whereas the Board of Education of Township of Lakewood has determined that the subject matter of these closed discussion falls within those matters described here in subsection 7B of the Open Public Meeting Act. Now, therefore be resolved that the Board of Education of the Township of Lakewood, County of Ocean, State of New Jersey, that the Board of Education in closed session may discuss one or more of the following matters, subject matters: board training by the NJSBA, any pending or anticipated litigation or contract negotiations involving the employment, appointment, termination of employment, and any deliberations occurring after a public hearing, which subject matter constitutes the subject matter described in subsection 7B of the Open Public Meetings Act. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education of the Township of Lakewood will disclose to the public the subject matter of said closed discussions as soon as the matter has been resolved and the determination can be disclosed to the public. Now, would I get them up? Next section. Okay.
I'll make a motion.
Second. Mr. Rodriguez made a motion.
I'll make a second.
Mrs. Slacken, second. Mrs. Slacken.
Yes.
Ms. Gonzalez. Mr. Nakdeman. Yes. Ms. Newhouse.
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Yes.
Mr. Tendler.
Yes.
Mr. Tricer.
Yes.
Ms. Jackson Byers.
Yes.
Mr. Bender. At this time, we're going to go into the executive session. I suspect we should be out about an hour. Yeah, I guess we'll
For your training, walk into the
Can I ask all the board members to take your seat, please? Could I get a motion to return to open session?
Second.
Who second the motion, please?
Second.
Mrs. Lacken? That would be here. Ms. Gonzalez? Mr. Nakdeman?
Here.
Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Rodriguez?
Here.
Mr. Tendler?
Here.
Mrs. Tricer?
Here.
Ms. Jackson Byers?
Here.
Mr. Bender?
Here.
Quorum.
Through the chair, just so the public is aware, we did have a training tonight. The board, as part of our continued effort to improve our CUSAC scores, we did have a training by New Jersey school boards, which there was a quorum. Ms. Gonzalez is not well this evening, but she wanted to let the public know she is reading the materials. So with the permission of the board, we'd like to go out of turn. We have two presenters this evening, which Ms. Winters is going to introduce. We are also live streaming this, as you can see from, again, I'm technologically impaired, but this camera apparently can live stream things so we can get questions, if any, from the public. I know Ms. Winters sent out an email yesterday, and I know one of the local publications also made it available. So without further ado, we're going to have Ms. Winters introduce Mr. Wins and Ms. Gamp. So Ms. Winters, if you would.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Mr. Wins is a school finance consultant with 46 years of professional experience. He authored the original school district budget guidelines, author of the original public school contract guidelines as well. He's experienced working with the Department of the Treasury, the Office of Management and Budget, and the Office of the Legislative Services. He's co-developer of the Quality Education Act school funding law, thoroughly familiar with the School Funding Reform Act of 2008 as well. Mr. Wins is a retired school business administrator and retired director of the Office of School Finance at the New Jersey Department of Education. He has authored many consulting reports throughout New Jersey. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Wins.
And our second, yes.
We have Sue Gam, Esquire, is a special educator and attorney who has spent more than 40 years blending her unique legal and special education programmatic expertise with her experiences as the Chief Specialized Service Officer for the Chicago Public Schools, Attorney and Division Director for the Office of Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education, and special educator to become a highly regarded national expert as an author, consultant, presenter, and evaluator. This background has enabled her to study and understand evidence-based practices, policies, and procedures that support a systemic and effective education of students with disabilities and those with academic and social and emotional challenges. Since her retirement from the Chicago Public Schools in 2002, Sue has, with the Council of the Great City Schools, other organizations, or independently conducted special education reviews of more than 60 school districts in 30 states and the District of Columbia, and five state educational agencies to improve the instruction and support provided to students with disabilities. She has drafted standard operating procedure manuals for special education practices and MTSS for more than 10 school districts, and has shared her knowledge of the IDEA, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act and related issues at more than 70 national, state, and local conferences. Sue has authored and co-authored numerous periodicals and publications about special education and has testified before congressional and Illinois legislative committees. She has also participated in the preparation of 4 Friend of the Court briefs for the U.S. Supreme Court. She has also been recognized for her legal expertise in the area of special education through her engagement as an expert witness or consultant involving 9 special education federal class action or systemic cases. Please join me in welcoming Sue Gann.
Through the chair, we're going to do this a back and forth, so Sue and Mel have prepared reports that we did make available online to the public, so we assume we're not going to just regurgitate those reports, we're going to get questions and answers so we can have a collaborative approach to our current situation. Our current situation, which will be announced further this evening, financially is one of concern. The board, to their credit, has opted not to wait till May to tackle this problem, but to start as soon as possible for the benefit of our students and staff who deserve stability. So we're going to go to Mel Wins. Again, Mel Wins' report is available and has been available on our website, and we did get it out to the press. We do thank the press for publishing Mel's letter in full. So with that being said, Mel, I'm going to ask you a few questions with the chairperson's permission. While Ms. Winters gave us an overview of your experience, just give me a little experience. You formerly worked for the New Jersey Department of Education, is that correct?
Yes, for 31 years from 1970 to the year 2000.
And what were you primarily doing at the New Jersey Department of Education?
My entire time there was in the Division of Finance. I spent the last 13 years as the director of the Office of School Finance.
Okay, and your familiarity with the funding formula, again, I'm a simple guy, so as simple as possible, what is your familiarity with the funding formula?
I'm thoroughly familiar with the funding formula. I testified. The funding formula that you're referring to is what we refer to as FRA. The SFRA means School Funding Reform Act of 2008. Initially, when that law was enacted, it was immediately challenged in court by the Education Law Center on behalf of the former Abbott school districts. I testified as an expert on behalf of the Education Law Center in that case. The court accepted me as an expert witness, and then in 2010-11, I again testified as the only expert for the Education Law Center in that case, again involving the Abbott districts in the Education Law Center. And
while you're a modest
we won
guy,
that case.
Exactly.
We won that case.
Right. It's nice to testify, it's nice to be in a case, but you actually were the expert.
I was the sole expert.
And you won.
They bought our
Argument.
arguments, and we achieved additional $500+ million for the 31 Abbott districts.
In addition to the state, have you ever worked at a district level in any district in New Jersey?
For 4 years, I was the school business administrator board secretary for the Trenton Board of Education, which is also an Abbott district.
And what's your familiarity with Lakewood, if you could?
I have a consulting arrangement relationship with Lakewood, which I began, I think, in the year 2003.
That's correct.
And I served, I say maybe, I don't remember the exact time, but at least 7 to 8 years consecutively as a consultant for Lakewood in various financial issues. And we were able to achieve in 3 school years additional funding for Lakewood of $1 million a year by, in effect, lobbying the administration at that time concerning Lakewood's financial circumstances, and to the extent that received an additional $1 million
For 3 years.
for 3 years consecutively. I guess we were successful.
Humble as you are. If you could break it down for both the board and the public, what is not working for Lakewood as far as the funding formula? What is, again, and I know it's a complex issue, but if you could bring it down to my level and that is an understandable level for people who don't work in this day in, day out. What is the issue? Why is the funding formula working for Lakewood? And if it's not, why not?
Well, presently, and here's the circumstance, and presently the funding formula, because it hasn't been implemented, isn't working for any school district in New Jersey.
And when you say it hasn't been implemented, what do you mean?
The law was enacted, as I said, and was effective for the 2008-09 school year.
And it
was
hasn't,
fully implemented. Since that year, it's never been fully implemented or fully funded. So when we say we have a formula, in my mind, it's questionable to say we have a formula when you're not implementing the formula.
and that's statewide.
That's statewide. So it hasn't worked for anybody to date. The dilemma now for Lakewood
Right.
is that the new administration has pledged to fully fund the formula. And
Is that good for Lakewood, bad for
I
Lakewood?
think the assumption generally is that's good for everybody. If you fully fund the formula, that solves the school funding formula problem for everybody. That's not the case with Lakewood. And in fact, it's potentially possible because of the demographics, which are unique in Lakewood, that Lakewood will be in a worse position than they were in for the present year.
Let me get this right. So the governor, to his credit, who has pledged to fully fund the formula, which hasn't been fully funded since its inception, it is your opinion that if it's fully funded, that's not a good thing for Lakewood because of the demographics. So break that down to me, and again, and understandable, and again, respectfully, assuming I don't work in this, and assuming the public doesn't work in this day in, day out.
Okay, let me talk about, when we talk about the formula and those things which are in the formula which are impacting Lakewood, we primarily have to talk about two aid formulas. It's the equalization aid formula and the special education categorical aid formula. Those two formulas do not work for Lakewood.
Let's take it one by one.
Okay, and let's start with the equalization aid formula. Essentially what the formula does, it's a simple mathematical equation. It says calculate an adequacy budget for each individual school district, subtract the local share, and equalization equals the difference between those two things. So if your adequacy budget were $10, your local share were $5, your aid would be $5. Okay, now let's look at the two components of the formula. Okay, the larger your adequacy budget, minus a given local share, the more aid you're going to get. The larger your adequacy budget, the lower your local share, the more aid you're going to get. So it's simple math. Now, when you look at the adequacy budget and the local share, those two components of the formula, okay, there are two concerns in the equalization aid formula. One affects the adequacy budget part of that equation. One affects the local share part of the equation. Okay, the local share part of that equation is based upon a community's property values and aggregate income.
So how does that apply to Lakewood?
Property values and income in Lakewood are soaring.
High.
High. They're not only high, they're growing rapidly. I know for a fact because the table of equalized valuations is promulgated annually on October 1st. I looked at what's going to happen with the equalized valuation next go around, 18-19, when they run the state aid formula. Equalized valuations for Lakewood went up in 1 year between 2016 and 2017, October of each year, $1,078 million.
And that's based on property values?
Property values.
And how does that adversely affect getting money from the state?
Let me give you the second part of that equation.
Okay.
Income in 1 year, different time period. They're a couple of years further behind in income. I think they're 2 years behind, so you'd be looking at the change, I think, between 15 and 16 in income, I believe. Yeah, between 15 and 16 is going up 180 million. Now remember, I said you take an adequacy budget, you take this calculated local share. The calculated local share, the two components of that calculation are property value and income.
Both of which are soaring in Lakewood.
Both of which were soaring. What the state does is it considers each one of them as 50% of that calculation. You take a rate, a statewide rate, which is yet to be determined. It's determined, and it's the same for every school district. For example, for the current year, had the formula been in effect, the rate was a little over, it was 0.014 times that determines a value. 0.014 times the community's property value produces half of that local share calculation. Then you take the income. Last year, this year it's going to, district income for the current year was 1.6 billion. It's going to go up 180 million. You apply a rate, because the rate last year was 0.04 and many decimals. The state uses many decimals. That's the other half. Those two things added together. Now, what's happening is you're taking a fixed rate for everybody against a much higher value.
In Lakewood.
Last year's local share for Lakewood, for the current year,
Right.
was $102 million. That says that's how much Lakewood can tax, $102 million, according to the formula. Okay. If you look at those changes, the $1 billion increase in property value, the $180 million increase in income, it suggests that the local share would likely go up to maybe $113 million. Now here's the problem.
Tell us the problem.
The problem is, now this year we were subtracting $102 million. Now keep in mind, I don't know how many people are familiar with Lakewood's present school budget. When the law was not fully funded, Lakewood was receiving $15 million in equalization. Currently $15 million in equalization aid. Had the law been fully funded for the current year, that $15 million number would have been only $7.8 million.
So let me get this in simple English. Because of our rising and soaring property values and because of our rising and soaring income levels, which are good things,
Right.
in a way we are being penalized from getting state funding. Am I getting this right?
Well, you're getting less state funding, yeah.
Okay, well, okay.
There's a penalty, yeah, that's the...
So does the funding formula take in consideration, we might have soaring property values and soaring incomes, but we have a public school population of 6,100, 80%, and based on a program we participate in, 100% free and reduced lunch. Primarily low income.
That's the other part of the equation, the adequacy budget. The adequacy budget, which is that adequacy budget minus local share. Now, we
Right.
talked about that second part of the...
We have the local share.
Local share. but I'm
Soaring,
expecting
booming, real estate, and income.
It's likely to increase maybe $11 million.
What is?
The local share. We'll
Okay.
go from 102, and I'm...
Go to the other half.
The other half is you have adequacy budget. Adequacy budget is based on the district's enrollment. And
Enrollment.
the categories of student needs within that enrollment count.
Well, let's break that down. Our enrollment, is that based on our public school enrollment only?
Yes. resident public school enrollment.
which is approximately 6,100 now.
Correct.
Okay, let's continue.
So if you have 100 students, and you weight the students, you weight them by grade, so you have an elementary weight, you have a middle school weight, you have a high school weight. You then also weight them by need. You have bilingual students, at-risk students, what they call combination students, which are students who are both at-risk and bilingual, and special education.
Which we have a lot of all those categories, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll go to that special education issue, because that affects categorical A, but also in part because there's a special ed component within a district's adequacy budget. The adequacy budget for the current year was approximately 110 million. 110 million minus 102 million would have produced the actual, let's say roughly 8, the actual number is 7.8, I'm rounding.
7.8 million what?
Equalization aid.
Okay.
But keep in mind, you're actually receiving 15 million in the current year.
So let me get this right, because I got to break this down for me and the board and the public to understand. We have high real estate values, which is great. We have high income, which is great. We have many needs, which is the other half of the formula.
Right. Now, next year, what will happen with your adequacy budget? It was around 110. There are cost components that are applied against those varying student accounts. They inflate automatically based on the CPI. CPI for next year is 1.51%. So if you have a $110 million adequacy budget, a marginally higher enrollment, less than 100 kids,
Right.
you can expect your adequacy budget would go from 110 million to maybe roughly 113 million. Take 113 million dollar adequacy budget minus an approximately 113 million local share. Guess how much equalization aid?
We get zero.
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 So if I'm
your
understanding,
$15 million number this year turns into a zero.
so let me get this right. Under the idea, which is good to fully fund the funding formula, which is a great idea. In fact, in Lakewood, if that occurs, based on our unique demographics, high property, high income, on the other half, many needs, bilingual, special ed, we are actually looking at, just yes or no me if you can, getting less equalization aid than we got this year.
I think absolutely. Now, there is
Can I ask a
provision
question?
in the law for adjustment
Can I just
aid.
ask a question?
Yes.
The adequacy budget is calculated by the state based on the numbers that we provide them?
Numbers of, yeah.
So the enrollment. and
Yes,
by
so your
category.
annual application for state school aid, which has all your enrollment
And that's
counts.
students, bilingual, and all
Yes.
the categories that you said.
Yes, absolutely.
So while the equalization will go down to zero, because you have a wash basically, you have the adequacy budget on one side, 113, and then you have the properties values with enrollment with their respective weights also equal 113, so we get nothing. But wouldn't we get other state aid?
You get other state aid.
Transportation and special ed and the other state aid, which is not funded at the full level. What are the calculations for those?
Well, you would expect that your special education aid would go up 2% maybe. And I think it was what, roughly $5 million or so this year.
Despite a budget of special education was about 32 million.
Yeah. Transportation aid will increase probably to maybe $13 million. So
Even though our transportation budget expectation for next year is how much, Mr. Finger?
Probably close to around 26, 27 million for next year.
So 26 or 27 million on transportation next year. And how much do you calculate we're going to get in aid for that?
I think you'd get about $13 million in transportation aid.
And how much is that of an increase?
How much what?
Is that an increase? from this-
Transportation.
A small increase, couple $100,000.
Minimal.
Now, again, you know, I don't have
A crystal ball.
the information that you have about what your accounts are, but just looking at the raw number. Now, your equalization aid will go down probably to near zero. I think what will happen is if the law, and again, I'm premising this conversation on the fact that the law will be fully funded. Keep in mind that the governor's education transition team released the report the other day, and they said two things. They said it may not be possible to fully fund it immediately because it's going to be $900 million more cost to the state, and they said we need to study it. It may not be possible immediately, and we need to study it. Those are alarms for me because they tell me that there's a possibility that it may not be fully funded, but on the premise that it is, I'm looking at what will happen when it is fully funded.
And what will happen to Lakewood, I just want to get this clear, even if the formula is fully funded, what I'm hearing you say, I think, is that doesn't help us. Is that yes or no?
It doesn't help you. Now keep in mind, your equalization aid, if it went down to zero, there's a provision in the law, if it was fully funded, to provide a category of aid that you haven't been receiving, which is called adjustment aid, which might provide maybe $5 million of adjustment aid to offset some of that equalization aid increase. But in that case, your aid would be virtually the same as what it is this year. The aggregate amount, maybe $25 million in SFRA formula aids. The reality is, if they do nothing to address this issue in Lakewood, and keeping in mind that the state had to intervene this year with a loan, they're going to have to intervene next year if they do nothing.
What does that mean in English?
That means they intervene now, in my opinion, which would be timely.
Now, like now?
Well, like before the governor's budget message is delivered, which I believe is March 20.
Okay.
Or they're going to have to intervene after March 20, and the district is going to have to go through all the angst of considering reductions in force, the kinds of things that you've done the last 2 years again. Ideally, you would want the state to recognize there's a problem with Lakewood, do that now so that all of that angst can be avoided. The point to have to intervene because they have an obligation to enable the district to provide a thorough and efficient education program. Now let me talk again briefly when I talk about thorough and efficient education program about the local share. Remember, I said the local share is what the law says you're able to raise. And keep in mind that it was $102 million for the current year, but your general fund tax levy is $96 million and change. Okay, you're not raising your local share in the current year. You cannot, because you're only allowed to increase taxes approximately 2% a year by law. Legally, under the SFAR law, if a district cannot raise its local fair share, it is below adequacy. It's not providing by law a thorough and efficient education program. Because keep in mind, you have the two components that fund a T&E program are equalization aid and general fund tax levy. General fund tax levy being your name for local share. If you can't raise your local share, then by definition, under the law, you're below adequacy. Now, it's interesting in Lakewood. Remember we talked about 2008. In Lakewood, when the law was enacted, about 2/3 of the school districts in the state were above adequacy, 1/3 of the districts in the state were below adequacy. Lakewood was in that 2/3 of the districts who had an adequate budget.
So when the funding formula or the SFRA was passed, we were adequate.
You were adequate.
And now,
Now, next year, you're going to be minimally, in my opinion, minimally about $15 million legally below adequacy.
so what does this mean to us? Cut through the chase with us. Is there something from you who's familiar with Lakewood, who worked for the state finance for 30 or so years, has been around and has studied Lakewood over the years? What is the solution here? Is there a solution?
Well, there are some, the solution would be, because I believe Lakewood is unique. Now, keep in mind, as a background to this, there are some generic issues with the formula that affect all school districts. But the way I would approach this problem is to address Lakewood's uniqueness. In other words,
What makes us unique for funding purposes? Bottom line meaning, understandable,
your local share is too high relative to the size of the budget.
our local share, well, we can't stop property values from increasing. And we can't stop people from making an income.
But they could, theoretically, they could freeze the local share calculation. As a practical matter, you're probably not going to cut your general fund school tax levy, okay? But they could freeze the local share of the law, at least temporarily in Lakewood, at the level of the general fund tax levy. Don't subtract the 102 million or 113 million. Subtract 96 million. Right away, 96 million from an appropriate adequacy budget number.
Gets us
Right
funding.
away, you would get to adequacy, you'd have the right amount of aid. Now, we talked about one problem, local share. The second problem deals with that adequacy budget calculation and that special education component of the adequacy budget. Remember, I said, if they do nothing, I think it's going to be around 113 million minus 113 million. But the reality is that $113 million number, if you did nothing, is too low. Because the special education component that's added in for Lakewood is too low. And
What do you mean it's too low? Again, bottom line me, understandable, assuming we all don't do this day in like you do, day in, day out. What's the problem with the special ed?
The special ed component in the adequacy budget is based on an enrollment count.
Of
And the law-
6,100.
Well, not even 6,100. What the law does is it takes 14.92% of your enrollment, which for the current year in Lakewood was 909 students. So you're receiving special education aid to provide services to 909 students.
Despite the fact that we have many more classified
Yeah,
students.
you have many more classified students. You also have
So just to be clear,
a large non-public student enrollment that you're under federal and state law responsible for because they're geographically within Lakewood, that you're receiving no funding for within the adequacy budget. So the 130 million number should be higher. Now that 900, now the component that's within the adequacy budget funds 2/3 of special education. So 2/3 of your special education funding is within your adequacy budget. 1/3 of it is in the form of categorical aid. Now the difference is that your 2/3 component, because it's part of the adequacy budget calculation, could be zero. Your 1/3 component may be $5 million, but it's only based upon 909 students, or the next year will be a fraction higher number than that, maybe 900.
As opposed to the actual students that we service.
The law doesn't use the actual student count in any school district to calculate special education. It uses a classification rate of 14.92% times significantly for Lakewood, only your resident enrollment.
Not the significantly large non-public population.
Right, because most school districts in New Jersey, very few school districts,
If any.
have to educate large numbers of students with special education needs or provide services to such students. Lakewood is unique, so when you ask me how I would approach this problem, I would approach it with Lakewood's uniqueness. Something has to be done to provide more special education funding, whether it's increasing that count, increasing a rate, modifying the adequacy budget and the categorical aid calculation to provide, you know, a more appropriate amount of dollars. So you're going to have to tweak, in my opinion, both the adequacy side of the budget side of the equation and the local share side of the equation to get Lakewood where it needs to be, and where it needs to be is to be able to have sufficient revenue to fulfill its constitutional obligation to provide a thorough and efficient education.
Let me ask you a question.
Right.
Mike Azara, as you may have seen a video in 2015, one of our two, at one time we had 3 state monitors, said, and I'm paraphrasing, it's a revenue problem, not a spending problem in Lakewood. Again.
Mike was 100% correct.
So when he said that and you say he's 100% correct, break that down for me. Why, again, assuming we all don't do this day in, day out, it's a revenue problem in Lakewood, not a spending problem. You heard him say it, now you say he's 100% correct. Why?
Well, let me look at spending in Lakewood. I looked at the comparative spending guide. And if you look at Lakewood in comparison to other K-12 districts in New Jersey, Lakewood, I believe in the last comparative spending guide, was out of maybe 135 districts with more than 3,500. I think there are 135 K-12 districts with more than 3,500 students in New Jersey. Lakewood was, depending on which year you look at, in recent years, between the 4th and 6th lowest per pupil cost of those 135 districts. So Lakewood is not spending anywhere near the upper half of what other K-12 districts in New Jersey are spending. In fact, they're very near the bottom.
Of the per pupil cost?
Per pupil cost. So
For
when you look at spending, you have to look at per pupil cost. So it's not a spending issue. It's a revenue issue. The revenue issue, which was demonstrated in the last 2 years when the state was even of the opinion that Lakewood could not provide a thorough and efficient education, and took the rather unusual step of loaning the district money.
You mean last year where they lent $8.5 million?
Yes.
Unusual for a state to do that?
I hadn't heard of it happening.
Okay. And the year before that, 5.6 million, and the year before that, 4.5 million. In your 30-plus years of experience working with the state, working in finance, have you heard these type of numbers being lent to districts?
No.
Well, we're going to get to you, but, and you feel because the revenue stream here is not sufficient, as Mr. Mazzaris said.
Well, it's not sufficient to legally
Provide a thorough and efficient education.
provide a thorough and efficient education as it's required according to law and according to the state constitution. Now keep in mind, what's unique about this school funding law, and the reason why when it was initially challenged right after it was enacted
In 2008.
in 2008, in that court, the first case I testified with, one of the reasons it was challenged And, you know, the Abbott districts felt that the adequacy budgets were being set lowballed, and they weren't providing enough state aid at that time for districts generally, but in particular Abbott districts. And they felt that the law would not be fully funded. Well, that turned out to be true, but the court at the time accepted the state arguments and promises that it would be fully funded. The reason the court found that the law to be constitutional on its face was that for the first time it contained an acceptable definition of what was the right amount of revenue to provide a thorough and efficient education.
Are we getting that right amount of revenue to provide a T&E education to our public school students?
No.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
I have a question. Right here.
Yes, sir.
According to you, there are basically, you suggested two ways to approach it. One is to cap the local share at 95, 96, so you have the spread between...
Well, some level below 113 million.
Right, so then you have that spread between that and the 113 adequacy budget which you project for the next year.
Again, I don't know what those
Approximate numbers, but there would be a sufficient spread to be able to fund the thorough and efficient. And the second one is to apply the 14.92 not to 6,100 students, which is our public school population, but to the effective number of over 30,000 students from which the special ed students are coming. So they're not only coming from the 6,100 students, but they're really coming from a much bigger pool, which is over 30,000.
Yeah, to use some more appropriate student count for special education.
To recognize the uniqueness of Lakewood.
Right, now that could be count the actual number of kids receiving services, apply a more appropriate.
Have you calculated how much more will we get if we apply that 14.92% to the actual student population, both public and non-public? This way we have some sort of...
I don't know what
Are you able to do this? This way we have some sort of a projections in terms of...
My suspicion would be, because of the non-public school component of that actual number, is you would not want to apply it to the full count of the actual number of students because it would produce too much money. So, but you have to apply it to some number higher than 909, but probably lesser than the actual count, some sort of compromise that would provide the right amount of dollars. Now, frankly, because I know Mike Azera, your state monitor, I worked with Mike for many years in Trenton. I worked under Mike in Trenton when he was an assistant commissioner in Trenton. He was the assistant commissioner in division. We worked many years together. I frankly respect his judgment a lot. And the fact that the state was willing to provide you a loan of 8.5 and some other additional funding, I think it was 11 or 12 million. And the fact that the formula calculates a shortfall between, let's say, minimally I said 15 million, maybe as high as 18 million. I think, here's where the subjectivity would have to come in, is what that appropriate count or what that adjustment should be, but it should produce roughly somewhere in that range of dollars, 15 to 18 million more. You know, there's no point in over-adjusting. You want to get to, you know, what you actually need, but not more than you need.
I have a question. Is it possible to maybe up the rate of the special ed council instead of 14%, maybe 15, 16, so that more is taken into
That's
consideration?
one way. But remember, I said there were some generic issue with the formulas, and my preference would be to deal with the uniqueness of Lakewood.
Yeah.
That generic issue, the fact that they use that 14.92 assumed classification, that's a problem for everybody.
Yes, it is.
So I think I would keep the same rate, let them fix that for everybody,
Gotcha.
and let Lakewood, but deal with,
So
let's apply that rate to some more appropriate count, rather than try to fix the rate when I know that's a problem for everybody. My preference or recommendation would be, let's deal with things that only concern Lakewood, not everybody.
So it's almost like Lakewood's going to have an IEP. We're going to have an individualized educational plan.
Yeah, but absolutely, that rate is too low. There's a whole justification, and I think Sue will talk about that somewhat in her report.
Let me leave off on this, because we do want to keep it, and we welcome questions. But bottom line, how do we project, and not only project, but how do we tell our students and staff? We just went through an incident where a tradition of Lakewood for 98 years, we read about in the paper, was being cut off by another district because allegedly we don't have money for sports teams. We find out these things in the newspaper, and then of course we do what we need to do to get that back. But how do we tell our students and our staff, what can we do? It's all nice, it's all great, it sounds good, we're not being treated fairly, the Lakewood public schools. What can we do? Practically, what can we do?
I think you do what you're doing now. One, you've got to be proactive, and what you have to do is you have to get to those officials within the new administration who understand what you're talking about. It has to be persons within the Department of Education or within the Office of Management and Budget who are both familiar with the school aid formula and Lakewood's school budget.
And from your experience, the probability of this happening from past history of Lakewood getting their own unique formula, what's the probability of that happening?
There is precedence for the law being tweaked for individual school districts. It's been done. There are some which, I don't want to say this, but I was one of the authors of the Quality Education back in 1991. Subsequently determined to be unconstitutional, so I don't know if I can say that. But it was unconstitutional because it required actions to be taken by the legislature to adjust something with regard to Abbott districts, and the legislature didn't act. So it was unconstitutional because we couldn't rely on the legislature doing what they were supposed to do. But in fact, there was at the time we enacted that law, there was a group of districts, and maybe I shouldn't tell you these stories, but there was a group of districts in Bergen County in New Jersey who they needed all the Democrats to approve the legislation. And there was one legislator in one town in North Jersey who would not vote unless his district got more money. He would not approve the law, they'd leave every Democrat. So we created a special category of aid which touched about 8 or 10 districts, adjusted the law, but we were really only aiming at one district. And there was a small category of aid that was created, it only impacted 8 or 10. It does happen. It was a unique circumstance, maybe part political at that time. But there is precedence for small tweaks that affect some unique circumstances. It's rare.
So who should we be calling Who should we be knocking on doors? Who's the who here?
I don't know, is the new, for example, is the new Commissioner of Education in place?
Being sworn in.
Right, and actually, he's from Asbury, and our fine Vice
Right.
President knows him because she works in Asbury. So yes, that's...
Right, so I would get to him, and, the individual has to understand Lakewood's school budget. They have to understand what happened the last 2 years in Lakewood with the loans, and they have
Actually,
to
the last 3
understand the
years.
school funding law. I simply, you have my report. They can, get them to validate it, can say, say he's wrong or he's right. I'd be happy to be wrong about this. If he's wrong or right in terms of what would happen if your aid is fully funded. Frankly, in my opinion, because I was with the Division of Finance for 31 years, and for the last 13, I was the guy that did this. I know those programs inside and out, because I created them. They should have, for all school districts in New Jersey, those aid calculations almost final. Now, keep in mind the budget is usually delivered around the beginning of February. It's only a new governor in his first year of his new administration where historically has been allowed to delay the budget message until March 20th. Normally it's February. So here it is, the last day of January. Those calculations, they should be able to validate or invalidate what I'm saying. And like I said, I'd be happy to be wrong. But look at whether equalization aid is going to decrease, as I indicated. Look at Lakewood's budget and see if that happens, whether their aid is not going to change. Right now, I have to assume that they're doing nothing about Lakewood. And what I've said, if they do nothing, this is what will happen. Validate or invalidate what I'm saying. If what I'm saying is accurate, then convince them that we need to do something in a timely manner. And in a timely manner, in my opinion, is before March 20th, and not put the community through needless angst and anxiety.
As we saw last year.
When in fact, they have a legal obligation to intervene anyhow.
Thank you, Mel. Through the chair, I'd like to ask the board permission from Ms. Superintendent Winters to send Mr. Wynn's report to the new commissioner, to the new governor, with budget projections, which you will hear shortly, and ask the new commissioner and ask the new governor to review these immediately and to come down to Lakewood, or we'll come up to Trenton. As we're hearing from Mel, and as logic would tell us, now's the time to do it before we have to have instability here once again for our students and staff who don't deserve that instability. Are anyone in favor of that?
I'm in favor. Aye.
Anyone, all in favor?
All in favor, yes.
Thank you. So let us get this out, Ms. Winters, if you could by Monday, get a letter to the governor, get a letter to the new commissioner or appointed commissioner, subject to his swearing in, but get it to him. Send Mel's report. We'll get to Sue's report, but I would agree, send Sue's report. Send our budget projections, which you're going to see shortly. Hold on to your seat and ask for help now. Is that what you're suggesting, Mel, now?
Yes, and I also would add, I'd be happy to talk to anybody in Trenton at the Department of Education who's able to relate to what I'm saying.
How about this, Mel? You ready?
Right.
Soundbite. Prove Mel right or wrong and prove it now, correct?
Yes, I'd be happy to be wrong.
Okay. Well, we would happy for you to be wrong, but we thank you, Mel, once again.
Thank you, Mel.
We're going to to take a brain refresher for just a few seconds before we bring our next expert. Our next expert, Sue Gam, is and we're going to ask her some questions. Let's just take a 30-second brain breather. It's a lot of information, but the board, and we're doing this at the board's direction, myself and administration, the board, and it was in the paper the other day, the board is not going to sit here, and I just want a confirmation of that. The board is not going to sit here. Should we not get the appropriate funding, this Board of Education, as a collective unit, is going to resign. We are not going to sit here as a board and tell our staff and our students, oh well, here we go again. All in favor? Aye. So there's no question, there's no smirks, there's no looking at Mr. Inselbuck, so we're clear. Thank you. We now move on. We've had our brain refresher, and the paper is right. Again, I don't read papers, but someone gave me this. I wouldn't give the Asbury Park Press the benefit of $1, whatever it costs. But the press is right. I have to tell them when they're right. We are preparing not for an upcoming game, but for what is easily the school district's most formidable opponent, the budget. And we're doing this, I must say, from the time I graduated here in 1983 till now, I've never seen the board be so determined to fight it now as opposed to waiting. We will send buses, but we're not going to wait till May, because as we hear, we brought the man who was in charge of finance, or a formidable force in the finance, for 31 years. So let us move on. We're going to move on to Sue Gam. Ms. Winters did give an introduction, but I just want to ask some questions of Ms. Gam. And again, we all agree, prove Mel right or wrong, but that's where we're at. Prove Mel right or wrong. And he would love to be proved wrong, right?
I would love to be wrong, and
But your prognosis is we are going to need more money. Again, it's a revenue problem, not a spending problem. Is that correct?
100% accurate statement.
Thank you. Without further ado, we go to Ms. Gam. Ms. Gam, if you could give the benefit, in the last 10 years, how many districts throughout this country have you visited in similar reviews regarding education and special education as you did here in Lakewood?
So just be a little bit more precise, when I headed up Chicago's Special Ed and Student Support Services was about 14 years ago. And since then, I've been an independent consultant, and I've worked with about 60 school districts plus, at last count, in 25 states and DC.
And what are some of the districts you've worked with in reviewing on an independent basis like you did here?
New York City, Los Angeles, and then most of the large urban school districts, going all the way down to very small school districts, some very wealthy and some very poor.
Actually, the way I met Ms. Gam is an interesting way. Back in 2005, when the district had a report issued by the Department of Education saying we discriminate based on various factors on our preschools, one of the board members then, Mr. Grunhut, sent me this periodical produced by LRP. And there was this young lady, Ms. Gam, who made a comment, and I paraphrase, "I can't believe things like that are happening in Lakewood are still happening in the year 2005. Those of you who know me, I like a good fight, and I like a good challenge. So I picked up the phone to Ms. Gam after she made her damning remarks about Lakewood. I said, "Ms. Gam, I'm Mr. Inselbuck. Good morning. When are you coming? If you're right, we change this place from A to Z. If you're wrong, you're going to eat your hat." Ms. Gam then came, issued a report on an independent basis, so much so that report, which is a matter of public record, the State Department of Education in Trenton withdrew their report saying we discriminate with prejudice. So it was the first time the state of New Jersey issued a report saying the district discriminates on a preschool level. It's online, it's available, and Ms. Gam, who was I can't believe this is happening, am I misquoting?
Well, I don't quite believe that I said that. I
Well-
like to think that I said, I don't know the facts, but if they were
Yeah.
so.
And again, wanting a challenge, I said, Ms. Gammon, the board approved that. Come down, look at any file you want. She visited programs. There was then a program at Macedonia. There was a program there. There was a program, Tiny Tots. There was a program called Shy. She went to the public. She wrote her reports, her graphs, her charts. And again, on an independent basis, the Department of Education in Trenton, the same people who wrote the report, withdrew their report. Again, costing us God knows how many hundreds of thousands of dollars, but there we go. So that's how
I
I
like to say, I wish I was that successful in Chicago, but.
Okay. Sue also worked for the federal government. Can you tell the public about that a little?
Right, for 13 years, I worked also with the Office for Civil Rights as a civil rights attorney and as a division director, mostly beating up on Chicago, which is when I was then hired by Chicago.
That sounds familiar. Lawyer beating up and then being hired. Oh, goodness. That's not, I guess that happens just on
And
Lakewood.
I was given the mess I described to clean up. So there you go.
There you go. So, Sue, you recently were invited back in December to look at the state of affairs in Lakewood. If you could, you have a great presentation with all kinds of charts, which we will put online. But again, I'm just, and again, we're trying to, we want to collaborate with the public, because as I've spoken to many leaders throughout this community of the mosaic of Lakewood, we're looking, what the state would love nothing more is for us to internally fight and go after each other for the same pot of gold. Finally, we are collaborating in the sense of we're beginning to realize that us fighting is, in my opinion, and others, is sort of enjoyed by the people in Trenton because it deflects their obligation, as Mel has said, prove him right or prove him wrong. So Sue, can you, again, we're going to skip your slideshow. It's very interesting.
It's a really nice PowerPoint.
It really was, and we'll put it online, and it has graphs, and you probably need Hammurabi's code to interpret it. But so why don't we get to tell us what you did. Let me ask you bluntly, what's the problem in Lakewood from a special ed education perspective? Bottom line everyone read the report. Again, I do want to thank the Asbury Park Press for publishing your report in whole, and we want that collaboration. We've set up again, I'm technologically impaired, so if I'm saying it wrong, a live stream, a stream live, or something like that. But if you could, what is the problem here? We need to get our message. Again, we have the former New Jersey Department of Education finance person. We have you, someone who has vast experience throughout the country. What's the problem here?
Well, in a nutshell.
Please tell the audience.
In a nutshell, which has, very many reasons, just like Mel just described in terms of the very complicated funding formula. But the bottom line is the district is significantly, in my view, underfunded for the federal and state mandates that it has in order to serve the needs of students with disabilities, regardless of what institution they're educated in, for all the students who are living in Lakewood.
And what's your basis?
Or going to school in Lakewood, I should say.
So what's your, again, and trying to keep this and doing this for a living in special ed myself, but assuming everyone doesn't, we want to have a collaborative force and an understanding force. What funding components are not treating Lakewood fairly?
So I divided this in two parts.
Two parts.
In my head, and gave the first part what I'm calling the base calculation.
The base calculation.
That's what I'm calling the base calculation. And Mel talked about this a little bit, but didn't use that term. But I need a term to put my arms around. So the base calculation that Mel referred to has a foundation of what the state is calling the census methodology. And we heard about that a little bit. And I was really surprised when I started reading, and I read, Michael kept sending me reports, and And I went online and found task force reports and expert reports that were written at the time that the SFRA was being discussed, and then maybe 5 or 6 years after that to look at what the impact has been on special education. And what amazed me when I first read the initial discussions is talking about how special education should be funded based on a census methodology. And that's a term that's used in this field. And the federal government first used it. And in fact, the federal government was used as the example in the task force, I think it was by the Department of Education at the time, as, look, the feds are doing it, this is a good methodology because it will not incentivize high identification rates, high classification rates of students, and it's a presumed, if you will, classification rate, and it's sort of treating everybody equal.
Can I cut you off? A census rate, I gotta get this into
I was going to go to explain that.
the Lakewood, get us,
So first I'm going to start with the federal government.
Okay.
Because this is what was asserted to be similar to why this would be good for New Jersey. And it's apples and oranges. It's totally incomparable. So the federal, to understand the federal funding concept, the law was passed in '97 when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was reauthorized at that time.
the federal law.
The federal special education law. Prior to that time, it was a per student. You got a certain amount of money per student. And so they said, you know, in fact, my friend at that time was head of special ed for the country, and he was saying, you know, we've got to do this more equitably because some places, you know, have like super high percentages, and other places have very low percentages
Of special ed kids.
of special education, and we need to do this in a different way. So think about this for a minute and compare it to what Mel mentioned, and I'll reinforce again, in terms of how New Jersey looks at this issue. From the federal government, they said, okay, we're going to hold states and districts harmless prior to '97. Okay, that's going to be what you got then is what you're going to get now. And then as our allocation for special ed at the federal level increases, that difference, the gap, here's how we're going to fund you. With a certain amount of money that we're going to have the bulk, 85% is going to be spent, is going to be proportioned for every student receiving an education in your district's boundaries.
Would that mean public and non-public?
So here, it would be 36,000 or so students.
So as opposed to funding,
85% of that, plus the remaining 15% is based on poverty. So there's a poverty calculation.
so let me ask you, in New Jersey currently, are they using this census-based
No,
idea?
not like the federal government is.
Are they using it at all?
They are, they'll explain in a second. Now, let me just say that this is, and that's a very nice formula for Lakewood.
Why is it nice for Lakewood?
Because it's based on all students predominantly. The increase is based on all students going to school in Lakewood.
Public and non-public?
Public and non-public.
Okay. And this is what the federal government is doing?
Yes, and interestingly, since '97, when this new rate went into effect, the federal government has increased funding by, I don't want to lie, by I believe it's $8.5 billion. So it's a nice chunk of change that is now available for this kind of funding. Now, the reason they did this is because it, like, you know, Title I, the feds, you use, you know, Title I goes to public school kids as well as non-public kids. That's Title I funding for the government. Well, for special ed also, the federal money pays a proportionate share of students who have been classified as having a disability. Parents say, thanks but no thanks, I want to privately place my child. That proportion of students is entitled to a service plan, not an IEP, but a service plan, and that portion of federal money pays for the service plan. Given that, it's a totality of students. So when I first read that, hey, the feds use a census plan, we should use the census methodology, we should do it too. However, in New Jersey, as Mel just informed us, there's a presumption that it's only for now, and he hasn't raised in ever or many,
Actually,
many
it went
years.
down. When the law was originally enacted, it was 14.96%. It's presently, as of the last examination by the state, 14.92%. So the classification, the assumed classification rate is actually lower than when the law was enacted. And like I said, that's a problem for everybody.
So let's work with this a little bit. So 14.92%, and then there's another smaller percent for that's applied to speech and language services. But let's do the bigger percentage first. So if you apply the 14.92% to Lakewood, and this is just students enrolled in the Lakewood
Public
school
school
district.
students.
So if you apply that, you get to, I'm going to use the same numbers as you,
Yeah.
909 students. So that's 909 of 1592. Okay? So if you subtract the difference, who's left out? 684 kids.
What's
So
1592?
1592 is the
students.
total.
Okay.
So 14.92 of 1592, this is getting you back to your math days, right? That's 909 students. You subtract, you're left with 684. So in my mind, 43% of your students with disabilities, with IEPs, are disenfranchised. And you're not receiving any funding for those kids at all, zip, zero, none.
So why is that why is
And then, exacerbating,
right.
2/3 of this smaller pot of 59%, 2/3 of them go into, and I'm learning, your adequacy budget.
Right. So the funding for that 2/3 could be zero.
So why is Lakewood, and you've done this throughout the country, Ms. Gam, why is Lakewood, based on its demographics, why are we hurting as much as we are?
So, as been indicated,
From a special ed.
I've never been in it. So let me give you one other point. So as part of the federal and state law, there are, you know the term child find obligations, child find. Find every single child attending school in the Lakewood school boundaries,
Geographic boundaries.
who you suspect may have a disability, may need special education. That extends to the 36,000 children attending a school within Lakewood's geographic
Yet
boundaries.
funding is only based on the public school population.
600, what we say, 909 students. But your obligation to do screening in the community, evaluate, to determine any child who's brought to you, to determine, parents says, I think my little Johnny, or my little girl, my little boy, something's wrong. You have to look at that child and see if there's enough information that you could glean from observations, whatever else, to go forward with a full evaluation. That takes staff, that takes resources, that takes space.
That takes money.
That takes money. So just to give you a sense of those 36,000 kids, I compared that number to some recent reviews I've done recently. And the numbers are similar to Tacoma, Washington, Cleveland, Ohio, Des Moines, Iowa.
And you've done these studies.
Right. And so this is big, and 4 of the districts are members of the Council of Great City Schools, which are the largest school districts in the country. So think about you're getting funding for this, the responsibility is for this, and that's had an impact. I also reviewed some of the independent audit that was done, looking at, well, you know, let's look at the classification rate. It does look high at 25.6 or so compared to the nation. Are there any issues around classification? I certainly didn't see anything when I was here, you know, several years ago. According to the independent monitoring, the independent audit that was done, there were no findings of any non-compliance, no questions, no concerns, no issues were raised around how kids were identified, how kids were classified, whether the classifications were appropriate or not. So, and when I reviewed, you know, I did a sample of files and nothing jumped out that, you know, everything, all the student files I reviewed were kids who clearly were substantiated by the evaluation process. So that means something. I did put one slide in when I looked at that percentage, because it was interesting to me. And one of the reasons I started doing this was because when I was looking at state data around classification rates, I wanted to get a sense of how this 25.3%, what we would call a special ed incidence rate for a school district, and this is typically how school districts do it. You take this number of students with IEPs and the number of students who attend that school district. And that's apples to apples, that's how we look at it. Kids who receive an IEP by the school district. So this was 25.3%. So I'm looking at the state's website and I say, oh, not all states do this. New Jersey does. There's a nice public website where they post district by district what the classification rate is. And Michael knows, I called him like, what? They reported a 59.9% classification rate for Lakewood. And I'm like, I've never, you know, I was like,
That would mean that more than half of our kids are classified, which is not the case.
So, yes, and this is public, so, you know, it's of a concern to me. I like public information to be, you know, something that resonates. So they wrote to the state to say, okay, how was this calculated? This was interesting, because this is a state report. And they said we took the number of kids with IEPs plus the number of kids on service plans. So the service plans reflect the parents who said thank you but no thank you. Yes, my child has a disability under IDEA. I'm going to privately place, and they get the proportionate share. So yes, theoretically they're enrolled, but what was the denominator? Only Lakewood School District students.
So let me get this right, because we explored this and I do remember the call. On the state website, it has a classification rate of 59-something%.
Almost 60.
Almost 60%. But what it did was it took kids with IEPs, individualized education plans, which are public students, and added to it kids who are non-public who had service plans. Put those two numbers together as your numerator, but the denominator didn't say 36,000, it said only 6,100. Am I getting this right?
Absolutely right.
And of course we wrote a letter, and of course we got some bogus response.
But they explained how they did it.
Well, they did it like you're saying. So, on the one hand, if I get you right, Sue, you're saying that as a district, we have an obligation based on geography. Every child in this town
Who goes to school here.
who goes to school in any school, Catholic, Jewish, public, private, non-denominational, charter, we have an obligation to find them to see if they need special help. But yet, we're only being funded for those students who are actually enrolled. Am I getting this right?
Correct.
Okay. And that's the anomaly.
Right. So actually, if you...
57%.
Right, and actually, if you did take all students with IEPs, all students with service plans, and then the correct denominator would be all Lakewood students, it comes down to about 20%. Which is still high, but there's a lot of school districts around, you know, especially in New England. I don't know what they do in New England. But in Massachusetts and New York, that's not unique.
So let me ask you this, Sue, because your charts and graphs and reports, and again, we do thank the Asbury Park Press for publishing your report, because we want to get out, we have nothing to hide here. In fact, this is the first time in many years the board, proactively, as a credit to the board, is getting the information out in January and February, which will hopefully help our public school students and all our students and staff. What is the bottom line? We need bottom line.
Well, I didn't talk about extraordinary aid.
Okay, but let me stop you before you go to that. What is the bottom line problem with funding for special ed in Lakewood?
Well, the first part of the
first
problem
part.
is how they are looking at the number, the presumed number, the actual number, whatever it is, what that figure is calculated to be. No way, shape, or form reflects the reality of students you're required to provide services to in Lakewood.
And again, so we're clear, because we are working with all segments of the community. We are responsible, and you being the national expert, I'm just a local lawyer, as was Archibald Cox. But the bottom line is, those of you who remember it, and Watergate and all that, but those of you don't. The bottom line being is that we are obligated as a public board of education to find every boy, Jacob, Jose, or Yaakov, or girl, I don't have to do that name, but the same analogy. We are obligated to find them if they have special needs, but we are only being funded for those who enroll. Am I getting this right?
So look at it.
Am I getting that right?
Yes, so in other words, you need the infrastructure of a Des Moines, Iowa, the infrastructure of a Cleveland, the infrastructure of the last district I forgot to mention was St. Paul, Minnesota. You have the infrastructure of the teeny-weeny little district for what your sister districts that belong to the Council of Great City Schools have to do that evaluation and classification process.
So
and determination, and to offer an IEP, because you have to offer an IEP, so that the parent knows what it is that you are offering the child, so they can, with some intelligence, say yes or no.
So if I get this right, you mentioned some of the cities you've recently reviewed, gone there, done studies. Des Moines, Iowa.
Well, I just mentioned a half dozen.
But the ones that were like.
Detroit.
But we don't have, we are expected to do the job of a Des Moines, Iowa, or a Tacoma, Washington,
or St. Paul,
or St. Paul, Minnesota. And as great as we are, we're like a little hamlet here in Lakewood.
You would not meet the criteria to join the Council of Great City Schools.
Okay, but yet we're expected to find the same amount of
You're
kids.
expected to do the same.
And not get the funding we need for it.
Right.
Okay, that's part one. Again, take a brain refresher, everyone, because we need all of you to be our advocates, because we need to get more funding here. So now we go to part two of this.
Can I just make a comment? Not only we don't get the funding for what the state dictates our obligations are in terms of providing and screening for the special ed, and then providing the actual services from the pool, the whole pool, the public and non-public, but we get penalized in every single state report for our administrative costs, because our administrative costs are calculated against the 6,100 students, when effectively it's supposed to be against this 36. The denominator always should be public and non-public.
And that
the
independent
36,000.
audit that I looked at and I'm borrowing from made it very clear.
And what's interesting, when Sue was talking about that independent audit, last year the board commissioned some firm.
Eric.
Yeah.
I can't remember, educational resource.
Right, to look at our special education and make recommendations. And in fact, they didn't find a problem with our classification rate. And what Mr. Zlakin and others have mentioned privately is when we get a call about a special ed child, whether he goes to Clifton Avenue or to Lakewood Cater School, we are obligated under child find, which means child study teams, which means supervisors, which means, and yet we're only getting funded for the 61, how many 6,100? 6,100 students. Excellent point, Mr. Slackett.
And don't forget, only a third even of that.
Even a third of that, which is everyone's problem, but our problem is exasperated. Maybe we need to change our town to Des Moines or something, maybe we'll get more funding. We can do that. What's the second part of the problem? And again, bring it home to us people in Lakewood, at least I am simple. That is, we need to understand, so don't go into charts and graphs. What is the extra, what's the next part of the funding problem for Lakewood as it relates to special education?
Okay, so now we're going to talk about not the EA of equalization aid, but the EA of extraordinary cost and the aid that theoretically supports that. So, you know, I'm sort of in the land of you can't make this up. So, how it's supposed to work is the district is supposed to pay, and I'm going to use some general numbers, and there's always exceptions to the general rule. So generally, you are responsible for for expensive children, the first 55,000, which is quite a bit of expense, plus 25% of the remainder, okay, of the balance of what. So let's say something, just to make it easy, let's say something costs 100,000.
Well, when you say something, so the public's...
I'm sorry, the services for a child.
And that,
That would be
believe
like
it,
tuition or something?
tuition,
Yeah, to make it easy, yeah.
tuition, nurses, aides, extraordinary related services, which again, whether we like it or not, Lakewood is a magnet, which is a credit to Lakewood for providing special education services throughout the country. We have families moving here from throughout the country for the special education services we offer. So,
And let me just say, even within the public school system, if you start itemizing every service you give to a child, it could add up pretty quickly. Okay, we did that exercise in Chicago years and years ago. It hadn't been done. We were like a gas. We were getting up to 75, 100, 140 once you added all of those different service
the nurses,
providers.
the related services.
Yeah,
So go
you're
ahead.
a nurse, whatever. So, 100,000, first 55,000 you pay.
The local budget.
A local budget, then do the math for me. And then 25% of the remaining 45 is what? 20,000 or so. I don't know.
I'm not good at math.
I'm going to make it up.
11,000.
Thank you, 11.
Mel is good at math, hopefully.
Thank you. So then the remainder is supposed to be your extraordinary care. However,
Extraordinary aid.
Right, sorry. Your extraordinary aid. But it's been prorated every year. Prorated every year. So it went from 84% in 2010-11, prorated, 84% of that. And then 6 years later, in 16-17, last school year, it went down to almost half, 56%. So what does that mean in real life numbers? It went from 592,000 that you lost.
592,000.
That you lost in 2010-11, and then last year you lost 3.57 million. Okay, so my nice little graph shows you, how much, that's a lot of money, right? The difference. Huge impact, huge impact, especially when this district does use the services of specialized schools. If you were a larger district, like in Chicago, we had our own. Okay, we had the sense of scale and the history in the budget that Chicago, even though it also relied to a great extent on private schools as well. So 24% of all students with IEPs, individualized education programs receiving special ed from the district, are placed in special schools. So if you're considering though, that sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But if you're considering that most parents who have a child who the district would say needs that kind of a specialized service is probably not going to place the child, him or herself, privately because, you know, not many people can afford that. So let's look at the denominator. So when we first talked about the 24%, which is about, let me say I wrote the number down, 1,500 kids, give or take. The denominator is teeny little local, you know, Lakewood School District. If I use the denominator of students attending Lakewood, which arguably is where those students come from, it goes down to 4%, which is lower than the state average and just a little higher than the national average. It all of a sudden becomes, I don't want to use the term normalized, but it becomes, you know, it makes sense. But the expense disproportionately impacts Lakewood because you're only looking at that small, the artificially small population from whom they're coming. So now you lay on top the proration, right? And all of a sudden, you're getting very little money for funding for those kids.
Let me give the public an example. We have created over the years in our public schools many preschool programs. Let's bottom line this a little. We have currently 138 approximately preschool special education students who are in self-contained classes throughout the public school district. We have 3 spots left currently for preschool, in-house, special education, preschool students. We are now in February. Again, I'm trying to bring this point to reality, which is when a child turns 3, and children turn 3 throughout the year, it's not like they turn 3 in September only. When you're born, you turn 3. If, right, doesn't that make sense, right?
Yeah.
But right now, and I told this to the board, and I thank the staff who helped me compile these numbers, but we have 3 spots left for preschool kids who want to go to our in-house special education programs. Follow this with me. We have at least 3, sometimes a week here. Okay, and that's because once again we're servicing 36,000 students, not only 61.
The size of Des Moines.
Right, the size of Tacoma. Call us Tacoma. Call us Des Moines. Piner's Pride is back, but not to that degree. But let's follow this. If you're a preschool classified student, age 3 to 5, we have nowhere to place you as of 3 students from today, which means, you know where I'm going with this, they have an entitlement, regardless of religion, color, creed. They have an entitlement for a special education preschool program. If we don't have the facilities in our public schools, we can't tell them, sorry, we're full. They then go, excuse me 1 second, to out of district. You can say it's Special Children's Center, you can say it's Shy, you can say it's the Alpha School. But we cannot deny public school preschool students a special education. We have 3 spots in this district left. Now we are trying to open another class. Hooray, that's another 8 spots. But the bottom line here is, and the special ed people, I see some of them here, who gave me some of this information, we have nowhere to place these students. So again, let's go through this logical exercise.
One other fact I want to give for context to this.
Yeah.
So the federal government has established what they call indicators. They're called state plan performance indicators that the feds monitor the state on and the state monitors the school districts on. And those indicators are a combination of what they call compliance indicators and performance indicators. One of the 16 indicators, about 5 or 6 or 7 are compliance. One of the compliance indicators that they are very strict on all of them, but one of them is that children going from Part C, infants and toddler,
0 to 3
0 to
age.
3, sorry, thanks, 0 to 3, to their early childhood services must be done by their 3rd birthday. And the state takes all of the numbers, and literally, if it's 2% non-compliance, you're out of compliance. And that's what you're monitored on.
And then Ms. Winters spoke with some principals, and we actually did a review for one of the first times in the district. We don't have space to increase our in-house preschool. Currently, we have 1 classroom available at Oak Street, 2 at Clifton, 3 at Clark. Again, we have a physical space issue in the district. We don't have enough room for our students in our district. Our student population is increasing, and that's even with a charter school. Our student population is increasing. The district is looking to create in-district special education programs, and all these numbers are great, and all this and that. Here is a situation we as a district are going to be facing as of 3 kids from now. Where are we going to put these preschool public special education? And while not politically correct, every student, whether he is Jacob or Jose or Juan, is coming to our district for preschool special ed. As kids get older, they may opt to do what they do at a district, not public, but everyone is coming, and this is not just a problem in Lakewood, but the problem in Lakewood is we don't have space. We don't have actual physical space. And we are not going to continue to place children in what we try to call modulars, which are really nothing but beat-up trailers, okay? And I've sued this district enough times and won those cases where preschool children deserve a classroom. Preschool children deserve a building. But again, goes back to the problem. We don't have enough money for buildings. So it's not all theoretical here. It is a problem, which means as of 3 students from now, we are going to, not we, not you, not me, but the child study teams and the IEP teams, which includes the parent, have to offer these preschool special ed students a place. And if you don't have place in your public schools, you go from 0 to 50,000 to 70,000 to 90,000 to 120,000, which I might add, all the rates are set by the New Jersey Department of Education. So we can't go negotiating with Phi or Alpha, give us a bargain. The bargain is set by the state or the lack thereof. So you say, what can we do? Well, this board is considering perhaps a referendum for a new building. Forget about selling our buildings, which is a myth, but about creating new buildings. And again, the likelihood of that passing is as high as me losing 50 pounds. It ain't happening. It ain't happening. It ain't happening. So what are we up to? We're going to fall further and further into the hole. So someone has to get this message, and the community leaders of all stripes, religions, and languages finally are working together. Again, the state enjoys, and the union, who we owe an obligation to come to terms and have a contract so our staff stays here. Okay? But here are the real problems we are facing. We don't have space. We don't have money. And again, I'm going to be doing this tomorrow, and I see the report of one of them, so you could try to, shake me up, but the facts are the facts. And even with the lawyer who makes a lot of money here, even with the lawyer, take him out of the formula, you're going to hear from Mr. Finger shortly. Let me break the news to you. Again, let's just speed this up a little. Mr. Finger, if everything stays the same as this year, no raises for Insaluk, no raises for teachers, which I'm against, no raises for anyone, how much are we in the hole if everything stays the same? No raises, no new programs, no new buildings. How much are we in the hole? Let's break out the number. Bottom line.
Spoiler alert now I can't have hold it all in suspense. $14 to $20 million.
We are looking at a deficit of $14 to $20 million next year if everything in this district, no raises, which we're against and the board is against, and the board will not be party to not recognizing our staff, and we've discussed this, for what they are worth, which is much. And I don't care if they clap or don't clap, because the facts are the facts. The facts are, I don't run for election, so I don't need anyone's vote. But the bottom line is, we have a fundamental problem here. And as Mel said, let's just bring this home to get this reality check. We're only allowed to raise taxes by 2%.
2%, so in fact, you can't, for example...
We can't even raise taxes enough to keep things the way they are. Am I saying that clear?
Yes, you cannot do that.
Yeah, you can tell.
Let me just throw one other thing in there. Even if the state turned around and said to us, you know what, we'll make you a special case, you could exceed the 2% cap, you could go up above it. Let's look what that looks like. That would mean every year in this town, you'd be raising taxes between 14 and 20% every year. Okay?
And we are one of the most taxed municipalities in Ocean
Within 4
County.
years, you've doubled, every 4 years, you'd be doubling your taxes. So that's one of the concerns with this, with what's going on. Well, what's the state going to come back to us with?
Mel, what do you want?
I think, I looked at, 2008, 2009, I think your local tax levy around that time was in the 60-some million range. You're at 96 million. So in 9 years, your tax levy has gone up, let's say 30 million to use a round number, but I think you were 60-some million at the time, 9 years ago. So you've gone up $36 million.
So Sue, tell us in encapsulation and in conclusion.
Can I just jump in one thing?
Absolutely. Prove Mel right or wrong. Prove Mel right or
No,
wrong.
I wanted to explain one thing regarding Sue's remarks. She talked about extraordinary aid and the proration. Let me tell you why there's a proration. Okay, and to know why, you have to understand the state budget process. The state, like a local school district, has to enact the budget. As we indicated, the governor will provide his budget message on March 20th. There will be an appropriation or recommendation in the budget for extraordinary aid. Okay, and that may be $10 million, $20 million, some number.
For the state.
That's the amount of money that they'll have available statewide for that. Districts apply for extraordinary aid later in the school year. Suddenly the request for extraordinary aid, based on the percentages, she's talking about, suppose the number's 20 million, the requests come in at 35 million. The state, okay, now remember that 20 million that was in the governor's budget becomes a law in the form of the Appropriations Act. Every year the legislature, by July 1st hopefully, it takes the budget message, drafts a bill, approves what they call the Appropriations Act, and that Appropriations Act, like your approved budget, has a line item in there for extraordinary aid. They have a $20 million appropriation, and they got $35 million of requests. Do they transfer money from another line item, like the local school district? No. Why not? Because in order for them to they got to go to the legislature. They have a choice of getting a supplemental appropriation, which means getting another law enacted. And the state treasurer rarely has the flexibility to move money around from one account to the other. In fact, if you look at the state appropriations, let's say equalization aid, that big aid category, unlike, let's say, extraordinary aid, 20 million or whatever the number is. Equalization aid, I don't know what it was when I was there, but let's say it was $4.5 billion. It'll be let's say it's $4.5 billion, so many hundreds of thousands. Okay, that number in the state budget is usually rounded to the nearest thousand. So if the last 3 digits were, or last 4 digits were 8, 6, 5, you know, that 8 would become 9,000, it would be $9,000 at the end, okay? In other words, it's almost the exact amount of their obligation to all the school districts in New Jersey. There's no fat in a state line item. There's no margin for error. You know, the calamity for us, in the department, I can recall, if we made a mistake, let's say we miscalculated some district's aid by $1,000, and they found the error during the year, was how are we going to pay them another $1,000? Because the appropriation, because it's, you know, it doesn't have enough money to even find another $1,000. It became a calamity. You know,
As opposed to here, where we need to find $14 to $20 million.
yeah, so the state budget process and the way the state budget, the appropriations are almost in the big aid categories exactly the amount of dollars you have to expend. There's no fat in there. And these line items, because they have to budget their budget like, you know, balance their budget like those, they're saying 20 million. That 20 million maybe, we can't affect, you know, it could be simply, we can't spend more money than we did last year. So last year was 20 million, let's make it 20 million this year. It's not necessarily with regard to the amount of need, and that's the reason for the proration. They have a $20 million appropriation, they have $35 million a request, so proportionately we reduce every day, you know, 20 over 35 million, everybody gets that fraction of their request. That's why that happens year after year. That tells you when you have a proration is that the initial appropriation is not sufficient in the state. And normally it's not sufficient because the state doesn't want to budget it anymore for that category, because once or twice that happens, you know to add more money to that line item. But that doesn't happen.
Thank you.
State budget process.
Sue, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to say two things, and I'll talk about the bottom line. So one, I just realized that I grabbed the wrong chart in my report, so I wanted just to let you know, and then I'll correct it. The out-of-district special school placement by grade, I grabbed the chart for all kids by grade, so it's not 1,500, it's really 378, almost 400. So I'll correct that and let you know.
And now you're bottom lining us.
But it's the same thing.
Bottom line us.
And one other comment. So, you know, as we've mentioned, I've been in some 60-plus school districts across the country, 25-plus states. Never have I been in a school district where the number of kids who've been parentally placed is anything more than a small footnote. Chicago, which has the largest number of kids in Catholic schools, largest Catholic diocese, thank you. Maybe 20% of all kids, if that.
In Chicago, let me get this right. In Chicago,
if my memory serves me right.
In Chicago, the non-public population, primarily Catholic, the diocese,
and Jewish, and a whole bunch of others,
was about 20%.
About 20, if my memory serves me right. But it wasn't large enough that anybody would be talking about it.
As opposed to Lakewood?
Or large enough in any of the reports that I write in any of the districts. It's not mentioned because
It's so minuscule.
It's a small amount.
As opposed to Lakewood?
As opposed to Lakewood, which makes Lakewood the size of Cleveland, Tacoma, et cetera, et cetera.
In other words, the population, we're facing a unique challenge in that we have 36,000, again, just so we can get an accurate handle on this, which I like facts as opposed to fiction, the non-public population, which has a right to move here, which has a right to access services here, the non-public population numbers, which we've gotten from state reports and other various reports, is increasing. This year, non-public enrollment is approximately 27,425. Next year, it's projected to be 29,221. which is an increase of almost 2,000. That's on a conservative basis. What we have seen in the budgetary process over the years is about an increase every year of 2,500 non-public students. And again, the answer cannot be go move to Jackson or Toms River. While there still are trees, there still will be housing in Lakewood. It's a great gig here. The township, who we work with collaboratively, approves houses, and then we, as a Board of Ed, have to provide the educational, whether they're non-public or public. We see no decrease. The amount of non-public schools in Lakewood, this year it's at 118. I challenge either one of you to find a district that has 118 non-public schools in a town. Tacoma, Washington doesn't have it.
Where the public schools are something.
Chicago, Illinois doesn't have it. And yet, this coming year, it's 128 schools. These are schools that are registered with the state of New Jersey as non-public schools. We are dealing with a situation that is not sustainable. And finally, in meeting with various sectors of the community and to continue to collaborate with our staff, our students, our public and non-public population, we're not going to wait till May. We're not going to wait till RIF notices go out, until we have kids who want to go to Temple University and a football scholarship have to start worrying, are they playing football this year in order to get their scholarship? But we need the help of the public. We have finally, and I want to thank the press again, and I'm not a big thanker of press, but I want to thank the press again. Usually what I've been told over the years is that and I go through writers like I go through tissues, but the writers, and I thank the press, a very good article, but then I'm told the headline is written by someone else. That's what I was told. I don't know if it's still the same. Actually, the first time I can remember, Lakewood schools need funding fixed, 2 studies find. We have brought to you 2 independent, yes, they're being paid by Lakewood, no one works for free, but 2 independent experts, one who's been in 60 districts in 25 states, or I got it the opposite, okay, who worked for the Office of Civil Rights, and then we have Mel, who worked for the Department of Education, Finance. Study our situation. Their mission, as the board and administration asked, tell us the truth. Is there something we're doing wrong here? Is there some money we should be spending differently? Is there something wrong with our special ed? And the bottom line is the uniqueness of Lakewood, and we all know it because we all live here, and those who don't come for a tour. The bottom line is we have a unique situation, and I ask again, Mel, what is the solution and when is the solution? Please bottom line me.
The solution is now. Then this is, I know you've started before today, but I say from this day forward, you've got to get to the right people. You've got to get them to validate what we're all saying.
We're not validating. Tell us.
Yeah, like I say, I'd be happy to be wrong. I didn't come out of retirement to be wrong.
Right.
But
I schlepped you out. Yes.
on the one hand, I'd be right, but I don't know being right will help Lakewood unless they do something about it. Get them to validate what we're saying. The first thing I think you need to do, and this is what you're starting to do, is the powers that be in Trenton have to look at what we're saying and make a determination whether it's accurate or inaccurate.
And
if
that's
it's
why
accurate,
the board asked Ms.
then they need to be willing to do something about it.
Now.
And willing to do something about it is in a timely manner. And in a timely manner, it's before the middle of March. You have 6 weeks to get the powers to be to
Recognize.
Yeah, recognize and make some sort of equitable fix.
A carve out. I think they should make a carve out for Lakewood, recognizing the uniqueness of Lakewood. That's what we need. We need a carve out both in terms of the local share, is that, and a carve out in terms of the way they calculate the special education students. Either count all the students or include the public and non-public together.
Any other comments from the board? Because we still have some, we tried not to load the agenda up tonight with other business because we do have a short budget presentation by Mr. Finger. We have given you out the number, though it's no longer a mystery. The number as put together by Mr. Finger, Mr. Campbell, State Monitors Azara, State Monitor Shafter, as well as Superintendent Winters, is a budget shortfall if everything stays the same. If everything stays the same, of anywhere between 14 to 20 million dollars. So at this point, I'd like to give a hand to Sue and Mel. I also want to thank the board for fully participating in the CUSAC in the training tonight. And Mr. Finger, if we could, I think we have a budget presentation. I know it's been a night, but we want to get information out there so we can collaborate and work together in any possible avenue. Share Sue Gamm's report, share Melvin's report, share the word, and we're going to have a preliminary budget discussion. You are being paid overtime, board, to be here. Do not leave me.
Go to the bathroom.
Okay, you're allowed to go to the young men's room.
Not only the brain needs a break.
Okay, and a preliminary budget discussion, which, as I have been told, has been shared with the state monitors. They've had a part of them. They review this and approve this. So let us look at this in brief. Everyone can take a 7th inning stretch, and here we go. No one can accuse us of not giving information. If anything, we may be over-giving, but we have to do this. We have to get this word out. So, Mr. Finger, I'd ask you, if possible, to condense, but to get the prime facts out. I'm sure tomorrow, between 11 and 12, you will have many good questions asked about this. So, just a preliminary.
Michael did ask me to keep it short, so we will. I cut it down from the original 6 hours to here 3. So we're doing good. Bottom line with all of this, we call it a preliminary budget discussion for a simple reason. This is not the budget yet. This is a discussion of where we believe we're going to be going for the next year. As Michael said, based upon keeping everything exactly the same as it is right now, just projecting it forward 1 year. It's all also based on our budget data, our accounting records, our payroll as of the end of November. We put this together in December. We were hoping to do it a lot earlier, but first what was it? We had a blizzard, then we had an ice storm. Yeah. A couple other, I was waiting for the plagues to start. Anyway, let's keep in mind, as again, projections are preliminary. They will definitely change by March. And if you're thinking that they're going to go down, probably not. They're probably going to go up higher. Because again, we haven't included yet any new programs, services, staffing, or anything else. And the other thing about the state aid allocations, they normally are released at the end of February. I did see just the other day that the state is they want to pass in the legislature, and it's not unusual. Usually incoming governors, they always give them extra time. They want to allow the governor until March 13th to give his budget message, and then the state aid numbers come out the next day. But right now, in years past, they also would change the submission date for March 20th and give it like an extra week or so. But as of right now, the legislation is, oh no, the governor will give his message the 13th of March, then the state aid numbers will be released on the 14th of March, and you have to have a meeting to get your budget in by the 20th of March. Yeah, good luck with that. The other problem we're going to have is with the new governor coming, who is pledging a lot of stuff, full funding of extraordinary aid, full funding of school funding formula. Will that really happen? And as Mel was explaining, it really doesn't give us a whole lot more. Although I had seen something from our state monitor, he had estimated like about another 3.2 million in full funding. And, but the question then becomes, will the state, if they do provide full funding, and let's say that does add up to another, with that an extraordinary aid, another 6 or 7 million, will they continue to give us the loan advances? Or will they turn around and say, well, we just gave you an extra $6 million? So all this is a gray area, all this is unknown. State aid won't be known until March 14th, okay, when it's released, the day after the budget message. And the legislature will more than likely not have anything really changed as far as a carve-out or additional aid for Lakewood as of March 14th. So we're going to be, once again, working kind of blind, putting a budget together. Okay. What are our goals? Now, these goals are not different for just for Lakewood. These are the goals for every school district. They're just a little bit differently applied here. Maximizing revenues, okay? Whereas other districts are looking at, well, how much do I need to take out of my fund balance this year to cover the difference between state aid and the tax increase? We don't have any fund balance, we're in a deficit. So all we can look to is hoping full funding of the state aid and extraordinary aid, and there was some kind of revision to the funding formula, or what they call a carve-out or something. My personal preference is to get the funding formula changed in the law, so that it's not contingent upon every single budget year. Will the legislature do it? Won't they do it? Will they cut it? Will they add it? It'll be in the law. The other goal, minimize expenditures. But at the same time as you're trying to minimize your expenditures, maintaining your programs, your services, and your staffing. Okay? That's tough for any district to do when they got state aid and they could raise their tax levy and they got surplus. It's even harder for us. And then the hardest part, of course, which is the goal that we must do because it's constitutional, provide a thorough and efficient education for all students. Not that easy to do. The budget timelines, again, a little bit of a change. The state aid numbers will come out till March 13th or March 14th if they approve it, and they normally do, the legislature. We have to see if we still have to get it in by March 20th, because that would mean having to have a special meeting like the day after we get the state aid numbers and putting the budget together that quickly. The normal timeline, then when it goes in on the 20th, the county superintendent reviews it for approval, for advertising. Your last day for a public hearing is May 7th. Your last day to adopt is May 14th. Now that's for all districts. However, here in Lakewood, as we know, by May 14th, you may not even know what your state aid advance, assuming that's what we're getting again. And then the fund begins between May 14th and July 1 when the new state budget comes out. What we are going to look at, though, tonight, and what we're really going to focus on, again, this is not the entire budget. This is not a formal budget presentation like you would see in March, where we have every single line item in there. We're focusing on the 5 major areas that drive up our costs every year, okay? Payroll, benefits, tuition, transportation, charter schools. The thing to keep in mind here is payroll and benefits. It's about 46% of our budget. And it's a nice chunk of change, no question about it. In the average school district, whether it be large or small, average school district statistically, payroll and benefits is 60 to 65% of your budget. Why are they so much less than Lakewood? All right, salary range, our salaries are lower compared to other districts, but that's not the big why it's only 46% altogether. Because our tuition and transportation add up to almost 40% of our budget. Now, the statewide average for most districts, and even when we compare ourselves to Brick and to Toms River and to Jackson, tuition and transportation range from, say, 4 to maybe on the really high side, 9% of your budget. Okay? So, at max, maybe you're talking tuition and transportation eating up 17, 18% of your budget. Here it's almost 40%. Now, I talked to Mel a while back about this, as far as what would be a way that would really help Lakewood, because there really is no other district that has this kind of demographic and split in its budget where there's so much money is going on tuition and transportation. If they would change the funding formula for transportation, because there is separate formula for transportation, and say, okay, in any district where you're mandated, remember, mandated transportation,
And let me just make that point clear, Bob. We do not provide courtesy or hazardous busing for public or non-public students. The public students who are living below the 2 mile and 2.5 mile, the township is paying for to the tune of $1.2 million. Is that a problem? Yeah, between 1.2 and 1.5. So just so we're clear, it used to be a rallying call when we were divisive here that hazardous or courtesy busing was eating up our budget. We do not pay for public courtesy or hazardous busing, nor non-public. What I mean by that is the LSTA, and I see someone here from there, and I know Dr. Rush is on the board, if that's the right word, or committee of the board of the LSTA. The LSTA, we as a district, based on law, only pay for mandated busing to the LSTA. What they then do to their credit is then bus courtesy and mandated, but we don't pay for the courtesy. So that little, it's a big problem. That problem for years, I used to watch the fights here while I was sitting here or sitting there. How come you're paying for courtesy busing? No more courtesy busing. There is no courtesy busing in Lakewood, New Jersey. Again, there is, but the township is paying for the public, and the LSTA is somehow, with the money we give them by law, by Trenton, only for mandated, they are doing that. So that big rallying call is no longer valid here. Go ahead.
Now, if they could change the transportation funding and it's put in like what I'll call a circuit breaker of sorts, you know, a trigger, and say, okay, in any district, not just Lakewood, any district, where your transportation costs exceed 9% of your budget, even if you want to say 10%, the state should be picking up that difference. That would go a long way to helping the situation here, and would bring our percentage down to maybe still very on the high side, but more realistic.
And so we understand this, Bob, if I may.
You want to make this a short presentation?
No, but I want to get out. Short is not always good if people leave here with misconceptions. Even though we get aid, and Bob has taught me all of this or given me the information to his credit, even if we get aid from the state for non-public mandated busing, it's still costing us, based on the legislation, which says we give $1,000, and I could be corrected, $1,000 per kid of mandated busing for non-public. It's still costing us from our local budget, whether it be $700, and again, that's based on state law. I want to make this clear, just like Alpha School's state rate of tuition or Shy School's state, as high as it is, as low as it is, it's set by the state. The same with the busing. It's not like, even if we all said we're not paying busing, you would be in breach of law because the state has dictated. The problem, and it's not a problem, we welcome all students here, but we have some 29,000. I challenge anyone to find another district in New Jersey where there are 29,000 non-public students, and there's nothing we can do about it. Go ahead.
Now, one last item on here with charter schools. Okay. I mean, right now it's a relatively small percentage, but that number is going to change over the years, and we'll get to that slide later on. But that's a small ticking time bomb that will detonate in about 3 years and really start hitting us. The other thing also to consider, and it's still up to the legislature and the governor, so those things may change, but in most districts, once there's a charter school in the district, there's usually more charter schools in the district.
Even though the governor's transition team said to slow it down.
Slow it down, right.
But again, we welcome the charter school. We have no choice. We must fund the charter school. So again, $13,000 and change is leaving the public school, going to the charter school, but yet our classrooms still need the same amount of teachers because you may lose 2 kids here and 3 kids there. You still need a teacher teaching the class. Go ahead.
Before I retired from TNEC, what started out like 17 years earlier in TNEC is a small little charter school, and everybody, oh, this will be wonderful, it's literally so nice. And at the end, when I was retiring, we were shelling out $5.2 million to that small little charter school that grew to a rather large charter school. And again, we could not save, we couldn't close a building, we couldn't lay off teachers, we couldn't eliminate programs because it was pulling kids from 5 different elementary schools, so it did not change class size in any way, shape, or form. Our expenses were still there, plus we still were busing those kids. But we had to find $5 million in our budget. So when people would come to our board meetings and say during budget time, well, you know, the charter school is free. And yes, it is. But we also used to show that there was a cost in your tax bill. Okay, payroll. We're keeping this one short. We're not really making any projections because, again, we don't have any valid contracts yet with our teachers union or our administrators. We hopefully will have
Well, we
that
have
before
one
June.
now until June 30th.
Till June 30th, right. But we don't have a new contract for starting in 18-19 school year. So all I want to show on this slide is this is what we're projecting to spend for 17-18, approximately $45 million, salaries, stipends, substitutes, overtime. Okay? Again, only the general fund, not any of our grant funds, because grant funds are not funded by property tax. Based on that number, just to keep in mind as we're going, because we don't put that in this presentation, we leave it as to be determined, but every 1% is $450,000. So essentially, even a 2% raise, that 14 to 20 million, add another million on top of that. Let me just slow Marlo. Health benefits.
Can we just go back to the last slide for a moment?
No, I'd rather
Go to the last slide.
You're slowing Marlo.
Ah, okay.
Let's go through health benefits.
All right, let's go through health.
You know, I'm not going to belabor the point. We all know health benefits are going up exponentially. Okay. State health benefit plan, we just got it confirmed. This was based on back in November. We just got confirmation of 13%. Yeah, actually, it's a little drop more than 13%, about 14%. Prescription plans going up 15% in July. Dental 15%. Even vision of all things, 5%. Okay. Due to our salaries now, again, under Chapter 78. For a couple of years back, and we're at the top tier on that, everyone who's employed has to contribute, okay? Our average contribution, okay, you know, it ranges from as low as 3 up to 35%, depending on family plan, single coverage, and how much you earn. We're averaging about a little over 16%. Why? Because most of our salaries are on the low side, okay? We don't have large administrative staff with large administrative salaries. Our teaching staff is not, you know, we don't have that as many people up at the top steps. We have a lot of people working in the district as drivers and aides who make between $19,000 and $22,000, so they're only paying 3% in towards their health benefits, okay? So whereas in most districts, that contribution average is closer now by, you know, because it's fully implemented, Chapter 78, and closer to about 22 or 23% employee contribution. We're only hovering at 16, okay? We're anticipating about a $3.2 million increase in the health benefits. I will tell you now, and there's a slide at the end, we're actually upping that number by an additional $900,000 because when it's a couple of things. One, the final benefit increase came in from state health benefit plan. Two, there was open enrollment. Okay, so now as January 1st, people had the option by January 1st to change what plan they wanted to be in. Well, surprise, surprise, whoever changed their plan, they didn't pick the cheapest one, they picked the most expensive one. Okay, and then looking at there has been work.
Which is their right.
Which is their right.
Why? Why? That's the law. Because
Yeah.
we're going to talk about open
Now that
it's
could
the
be.
law. They have the right to do that.
Now that can be changed. That can be changed contractually. But it cannot be changed
Currently.
arbitrarily by one side. It can be
But
changed.
that's something you
it's a
should put
collective
an
bargaining.
asterisk when we have these negotiations.
But we're not negotiating.
But we're not negotiating in public.
So that's where we stand with health benefits. And again, that number there, add another $900,000 to that. The only way we may save a little bit is the vacant positions that I was budgeting for. There may not be as many vacant positions because some may just be, you know, they're vacant. We're just going to eliminate them, so that could bring that down a little bit. Out-of-district tuition, we've discussed this for how many years? Here's the problem. 4% tuition increase is what we base this projection on. The state released that, again, we finished this up in December. A week and a half ago, the states released their estimated tuition amounts that all districts must use when sending students out of district to private schools for the handicapped. Okay? Most of them, there were a couple that hovered around 2 and 3%, some around 4, and some at 11. And unfortunately, one of the ones that we use extensively at 11% increase.
Can I just go through that?
Hold on.
Which sound like I really will.
Okay, so what we're estimating is our, it's getting late. Our 17-18 tuition we're estimating for the current year, we should top out around 31.3 million. We were estimating a 4% overall increase. Again, that's out the door because it comes out to more than that. Additional students, and what's our call our rebuilds. The state law allows private schools for the disabled, they do an annual audit. When that audit's done, the auditor has to determine and actually puts it into the audit report, okay, school district X sent you 100 kids, they use the state estimated tuition, they paid you $100, the audit shows they should have paid you $110. So here's a bill. Well, we're estimating for next year between additional students and those, and you have a year to do that rebuild. So from 16-17 rebuilds, which will become due in 18-19 to pay, tack on another 4.7 million. So we were estimating at this point now approximately a $6 million increase in tuition for next year, based upon the numbers that came out from the state with the estimated tuition and the districts and the schools that had very high increases, tack on another $1.5 million to that. Guys, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Gentlemen,
This is really for your benefit.
We're talking about this.
I'm explaining to them what the rebuilds
Wasn't it? All right, transportation. We beat this one to death too. We normally use $2,500 at $1,000 a piece. Okay. The only thing that may save us a little is Mel told me earlier that the CPI increase, which I used at 2%, last year was only 0.3, the state CPI. He's saying that he understands it's going to be about 1.5, so you could talk about saving about $100,000 on that one. As you see, offset by additional state aid, because Mr. Shaft and I were discussing this, we said, you know, we're projecting it. He says, well, you know, let's put that on here too, because it's a separate form of state aid. The state pays the difference between $710 and $1,000. So you're going to get back $290 a student. So we're still looking at about $2.3 million increase in transportation. Again, that doesn't include salaries, that doesn't include benefits. Okay, this is just really the root costs that we're looking at. Okay, we may save a few dollars on this. We'll have to see what happens. And then the last cost driver, which is, like I said, the ticking time bomb, charter school, which, well, next year, take a look, going up about $730,000, and that's based upon taking in an additional 60 students. Now, if it ends up that more than 60 students go, we pay extra. If it's less than 60, yeah, we could save a few dollars. The likelihood is there's going to be more than 60 kids going in. And the problem is that by 2020-21, when they've reached their to max out the number of students that they could have, that tuition cost, well, this year, that tuition cost of 2.7 projected is going to go up to close to $5 million. And the busing cost right now is about $500,000, it'll double to $1 million. So you're talking just a few short years down the road of spending $6 million on that charter school, assuming no other charter schools open.
And let's just look at this number if we could. This is something we have no control over.
Not
correct?
Absolutely no control.
So coming out of our budget this coming year, I just want to make sure I understand it, is 2.6 million
projected. Could be more than that.
Plus transportation.
Plus transportation, right. And we don't have any control over that at all. And the state just will tell you that, you know, when these state aid numbers come out in March, they will tell you, here's the number to budget, their projection to budget for. But even once you do that, because that's happened to us already, we had a number budgeted, there were more kids going, the state says, oh, you're gonna pay the difference. We had this year, we budgeted what the state originally said, $1,942,251, and, what was it, like a month or so ago? A little over a month? We ended up having to put in another $125,000. And now the summer.
If you could look at the summary.
This is really key. First three numbers, of course, I got that from our state monitor. What the loan was advanced that we got, the deferral for this year at least, for the bulk of it, sports grant. So we're starting off with saying, okay, this year we got a total between the town and the state of $11 million. Let's just go right down the line. Increasing payroll, we're leaving that blank right now, but keep in your head at least $1 million. Okay? Benefits, tuition, transportation, and charter schools. So total additional needed, call it a little over $24 million. We will raise the tax levy by 2%. Okay? So that knocks off approximately $2 million. I'm going to disagree a little bit with Mel about the full SFRA funding, because I contacted some people at the state and they said, well, based upon the printouts that they have, we would get about 3.2 million more. Overall, I mean, some equalization aid would come down, transportation would go up, special ed would be adjusted. And if we got full extraordinary aid funding, based upon what we got last year, which was prorated, had we got the full amount, it would have been another 3.4. So without even taking payroll into account, we're looking at 14.6 million in the hole. In other words, the state would have to come up and say, here's not 11 million, we'd have to give you now 14.6 million. Throw the payroll in, it's 15.6 million. Plus what we were discussing earlier with the increase in medical and tuition, you're talking well over $17 million. Okay, minimum that the state has to put in. If they don't give us full funding, add another $6 million to that. Here's the problem. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for the state. It's not sustainable for us, because we have to pay this money back. Okay? The loans, right? We have to pay the money back to the state at some point. And then now technically for next year, the printout that the state monitor shared with me shows that the state, unless there's some special deferment, we're supposed to put into our budget for next year $2.1 million to pay back to the state. Now, it's not going to work where you say, oh, everyone says, oh, no big deal, we'll put 2.1 million in, and we'll ask them for another 2.1 million. It's not happening. Okay? That's why that funding formula has to be changed.
I have a question. You said that you contacted someone on the state level.
Right.
Was there a preliminary run of the SFRA in regard to Lakewood?
No. I just asked them, I said, the state prints out every year, and they did for this year as well, for 17, 18. They give you, here's your state aid numbers, and here's what your state aid numbers would look like.
I've seen those, yes.
If there was full funding. And all I called my friend, I said, let me just double check with you. So this is technically what we should have gotten had it been full funding, right? He says, yeah. I said, okay, and it did show on that, that equalization came down, but transportation went up, and special ed kind of jiggled around a little bit. So we would have gotten another 3.2.
So just the equalization went down to what? Do you know any approximate? Because according to Mel, it's going to zero.
I think the equalization came down from 15 million to around 4 or so.
Around 4.
The transportation went up from 4 to around almost 13.
But then again, we have the increased students.
Right, so that's why Mel is saying that probably will all change going into next year.
Right.
Because last year, when the state ran the full formula, the transportation should have been 10 instead of the 4 that we received in the current year.
Right. Okay. And again, now here's the update, but we've already kind of discussed this. So tuition increase going up, benefits going up. With everything together, additional state aid actually of over $17 million. I'm hoping, that on the 13th, that we'll get a little extra reprieve to put a budget together and not have to have a budget meeting like 2 nights after that. But we'll see. state is always pleasant and nice about things like that. Vacancy update, as of today, we still have 20 vacant positions that have not been filled, certified teachers, supervisors, and 6 paras. The accounts payable clerk was filled. And our legal update, savings to the district. Through 2000, since August, through litigation, we saved approximately $500,000 by having them, well, you know what, I will let Michael start. I'll let Michael.
Okay, but I want you to complete it.
By having children attend school in a less restrictive and less costly environment, that's still free, appropriate public education.
Any questions of the board? First of all, let's have a hand for Mr. Finger. And we thank Mr. Campbell for his input, the monitors, and I just want to get this clear. The monitors have reviewed this and approved this, sir? Yes.
They have reviewed and approved this presentation.
Yes, so it has a certification to it. Any questions? It's preliminary. It's a lot of information. This board has, and administration to their credit, we want to get ahead of the curve, if you will. This is preliminary in nature, but nevertheless, we now know publicly that it's anywhere from 14 to 20 million. And while that does represent a wide span, we can easily see how $1 million here, $1 million there actually could be a very real possibility. Is that right?
Absolutely. Okay, and again, that's predicated on the fact no new staff in program or service.
That's right. No new preschool classes, which we need, and other such things. So, any questions preliminarily? You know, again, you need time to study this, I'm sure. So we'll get back again at the meeting. We'll discuss this. Mr. Finger, would there be any objection, just out of curiosity, to posting this to the website? Would there be no problem? So we could post this to the website on Friday. You did make you need to make just some final reviews. So if the board's okay with posting this on the website?
Yes.
I see a lot of people taking pictures, no need. We will actually have it on the website because why not? And again, if we are looking for a collaborated effort, so if someone out there knows something wrong there, let Mr. Finger or Ms. Winters know because we want to get ahead of the tsunami, not be swept up by it. So with that being said, let's have another hand for Mr. Finger.
I would just make one other thing, and again, this is just my personal opinion. Last year, and the last couple of years, when you approve the budget and then you go ahead and, not sure what the state aid is going to be, and you do the RIFs, reduction in force, which is, that's technically, that's the correct thing to do, it's the right thing to do, it's the practical and fiscally prudent thing to do. My suggestion, and I've said it to Michael, I've said it to Mrs. Winters, I said, in my opinion, we need to send the state a message.
Listen up, please.
We need to turn around and say, you know what? If you have, like May 14th, when the board has to make that decision, who stays, who goes for next year as far as renewals, appointments of people, have the board turn around and say, well, you know what, if the state by that point hasn't gotten back to us, whether it's a state aid adjustment, a carve-out, another loan, or whatever, turn it, well, you know what? We are not going to rip anybody. We are going to be certified. We need X number of people for it to be a thorough and efficient budget, period.
And then what
We're not going to rip anybody, and the state, look, you've got to give us the money. And that's it. Now, in other words, it puts the burden back onto the state. Because they're always going to, if we rip people, and people now leave and they don't want to come back to the district, rightfully so, that they wouldn't want to be ripped. Now the state turns around and they wait, and now suddenly over this, okay, well, here's the money we're going, oh, yeah, a lot less positions here,
Bob, a good bus ride, usually overnight, gets $8.5 million.
It can do that too.
Right, overnight.
It can do that too. And again, that's just my suggestion. For this time, to maybe say to the state, no, we're not playing the game. We're not going to rip anybody.
Thank you,
Case
Bob.
closed.
Thank you, that's an excellent idea, and at the appropriate time, I'm sure all of the audience would appreciate that. We need to review this, but we are now done with the excellent presentation. We didn't have to introduce, and we thank the live stream or stream live or whatever it is. We can close that down. And we also must make, is it live stream or stream live? Live stream. We also want to thank the Lakewood Police Department for coming and we do appreciate the collaborative effort we have with the township and continue to have to the township, and hoping that we need not appear with our football team yet again in June. With that being said, we need, I know, get some incense here, wake yourselves up. It's been a night here, but we've gotten information out, which is important. We will not do this every meeting, do not worry. But now we need to get to our regular scheduled business. I would ask the following items be removed from the bill list. I would ask, I am learning as I sit here, that the any bills with tender touch with the NPSSP be removed from the bill list until a review, which I would assume would have been done before it went on the bill list, be removed until the February meeting. Again, I was in court today, but I'm learning, I don't know what, but let's just, does anyone have any problem with removing that? Please take my suggestion. We're removing from the budget, no, from the pay, I'm a little tired. The bills list, the NPSSP tender, thank you, Diane Piazzante.
Good job.
Good, okay. 4 a.m. till now is getting to me. We're removing 601,037. We're not saying there's any issue, but I am seeing on whatever this computer's called, I am seeing we just have to go through the appropriate review. Okay? All in favor?
Yes.
Aye, good. Now we took care of that. No yawning out there, please. I don't know how you get up tomorrow to teach. God, I have to be in court. All right, so now Mr. Campbell.
We have the
Let's
recognition.
have a hand for Mr. Star Ledger. Okay. We'll let you know how we vote after you write your article. Okay, and, okay, Mr. Campbell.
We have recognition of the public. We have one individual, Dr. Rush.
No, Dr. Rush is indicating no thing, okay?
All right, next we have
Too much drama, too much information.
Next we have the additions to the body of the agenda. There's 2 pages that you're given there.
Yes.
Page 1, 2, and 3.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, next is the business agenda that we're going to vote on, with the exception of tender touch for that one bill. We're
Yes, please.
pass on that.
Motion.
Be removed.
Second.
Who made the motion? Mr. Tricer, thank you. Second? Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone against? Seeing none. Mr. Campbell.
Okay, next, I have one resolution that I need to put on that you guys vote on. It's it to be resolved that the Lakewood Board of Education approves Ray and Associates, Inc. to conduct a business administrator search at a cost of $9,000 plus advertising and other out-of-pocket expenses.
Motion.
Second.
Just so the public is aware, and I know the board is, we interviewed 2 companies this evening in closed session, search companies, if you will, to look for a permanent business administrator. That does not mean our interim are not going to be considered, but we do need a permanency in the business administrator. We are doing a national search for a business administrator. There were 2 companies who presented presentations, and we thank Dr. Rush for an excellent presentation. And if you could just read that resolution again slowly.
Okay, be it resolved that the Lakewood Board of Education approve Ray and Associates, Inc. to conduct a business administrator search at a cost of $9,000 plus advertising and other out-of-pocket expenses.
Okay, so all in favor to adding that to the agenda?
Aye.
Seeing any no's? No. Okay.
Next, we have the superintendent's agenda. That includes the additions.
Who made that motion, Mr. Zlatkin, to do the HYA, and Herb seconded and everything?
Yeah.
Okay, you both seconded. Thank you.
Rain
Rain,
Associates.
oh goodness, wait a minute.
Motion.
Rain Associates.
Motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, we clarified that for the record. Wait a minute, our friend from the Star Ledger says, let me come back. Go ahead.
Next is the superintendent agenda, which includes the additions to the body of the agenda and the superintendent's agenda.
Motion,
Second.
who made the motion?
Herb.
Second.
Herb, second.
Second.
Thank you, Vice President, all in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions, any noes? Seeing none,
None.
thank you.
Is there any old business? Any new business? Good and welfare? Motion to adjourn.
We will let the public know tomorrow, Ms.
All in
Win-
favor?
Thank you. Ms. Winters, Mr. Finger will be live streaming with the Asbury Park Press tomorrow from 11 to 12. We thank you for enduring, we thank you. We are going to post these things up on the website by Friday, so if your picture is in picture, we want you to have information, so by Friday. Thank you, everyone, good night, be well, be safe.
You're the key to the room? Get in?
I'll be your body, right? No